So, how would you define depression? There's a loaded question, right? Andrew, do you want to start off today?
Certainly. If I think back about my life, there were many periods, even during my teens, when I didn't even realize that I was experiencing depression. But as I'm older now and I can articulate it from the inside out, I can recall feeling discouragement kind of seep into the cracks of my person and feeling a sense of darkness and hopelessness all around me. And sometimes if you're not experiencing depression, you think it's just feeling sad, but it's a whole lot more of that. It's a depletion of your emotions, of your energy, of your strength, and of your hope. And it can last for varying periods of time and varying degrees of intensity. And sometimes it looks different for different people. So, especially in children that I've worked with over the years and teens, sometimes you would see aggression and anger, and those are actually outpouring of actual depression. So it can look very
Interesting.
different, but those are some of the emotions and the moods that come along with it.
That's really helpful. Harrison, can you add to that?
Sure. When I look at depression, I look at it more where stress, like psychosocial stress, affects our well-being, and people have a hard time learning how to cope, or maybe they don't know how to cope. And so when you have these, later on we'll talk about some of the chemical levels when it's dropping and the mood level starts dropping. Sometimes it drops so low that people start thinking negative thoughts. Interestingly, Laurie, like I was reading an article from Statistics Canada, and we are number 4 on the list for antidepressants
Wow.
users in the world. A few years ago, we were number 1, and I was like so shocked for prescriptions how much Canadians are struggling with depression. And sometimes we're going through depression and we have no clue it's actually depression, as it affects our whole neurovegetative state. People sleeping, eating habits changing, restlessness, cannot concentrate, memory issues. Those are all symptoms that, yeah, something is not right. We need to stop for a moment and check what we need to do rather than ignore it and it gets worse.
Well, you brought up that there's a difference between seasonal depression and clinical depression. So, Mary, can you help us understand what's the difference?
Yeah, well, actually, the term clinical is informally used as a way to determine how dysfunctional the depression is. So, seasonal affective disorder is actually a form of depression. So, the clinical piece of it, either of them, whether it's a major depressive disorder or it's seasonal affective disorder, can also be quite severe. The difference between the two is that with the seasonal affective disorder, it's focused on how a person is responding to changes in the weather. So
Okay.
typically during the winter months or even fall when the light is less, we have less access to sun. People aren't able to move around as much. So people would get diagnosed with this and they may suffer it 40% of the year as opposed to the entire year. Whereas a major depressive disorder doesn't have rhythms around the weather. It's more typically around stress or what might be happening with the person's life.
Okay.
That's where you're going to see some of the ups and downs.
Good. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I'm just recalling people that I've worked with over the years and some of the challenges that they face with those external stressors that kind of manifest themselves with that depletion that I talked about. And some of the things that were really, really helpful were staying connected to other people, being open to allowing people to come into that space and encourage them and come alongside them. One parent actually got their son a physical a trainer, right, to encourage them to get out, to get up, and it was hard. A lot of the from the outside, a lot of the impressions that people have about depression is that it's easy, just shake it off,
Right.
you can do it. Whereas from the inside, not so easy.
Mm.
So the successes that I've seen people grow through and come through have been as a result of being open to that support, trying to have some routine and not expecting themselves to be perfect all the time,
Right.
but continuing to put one step after the other, after the other, after the other.
Well, thank you for bringing that up because I think it's true that sometimes we just say, "Well, just shake it off, get over it," and we
Mhm.
we overlook what may it deeply is happening inside. So let me ask this question: the chemical aspects of depression. Harrison, would you start to just help us understand what that is?
Sure. When we look at how the chemical works, like neurotransmitters, we call them. There's several of them, predominantly dopamine and serotonin. I know it's kind of a boring topic for some people, but typically when the brain is flooded with dopamine and serotonin, people go into psychosis, and we're seeing that. I know it's not a topic today, but cannabis use has been really having a negative impact where the brain is flooded with dopamine and serotonin. And then when the chemical level drops, it's almost like a water bottle where the water just gets empty, or a reservoir. It gets empty and empty to the point where people lose hope because the chemical is so low, and they need some kind of coping strategy to balance it. And then, of course, sometimes they go to a psychiatrist or the doctor and they get some anti-depressant medications. But typically, when we look at the chemical level, we need to bring a balance to it. And hopefully, perhaps before the end of the show, we can give some coping strategies,
Right.
healthy coping strategies.
Yeah, very good illustration of the water bottle. Mary, what's your response?
Yeah, I mean, we do know that with depression, the serotonin and dopamine levels are often lower. The question is, what comes first? Does my dopamine and serotonin levels drop and that's why I get depressed? Or is it because I'm having depressive thoughts and grief or challenges with my life? And as my thoughts go down that road, it begins to lower the levels of the serotonin and dopamine. And we do know now, research shows that if I have a negative thought, it does release a toxic chemical because it's kind of gearing our body up for responding to survival. So if you kind of look at it from that standpoint, yes, medication can be really helpful to help adjust, especially if the person is really depleted. But you can see that there has to be changes in other areas of their life to really help them get to that good level of your chemicals in their brain.
Yeah, boy, that's helpful. That's really hopeful, Mary, because I think
Mhm.
sometimes when we think about chemical imbalances, we're out of control. It's something that something
Right.
else has to control. But you've just reminded us that there are many things preemptive to that are in our
Hmm.
control. We're going to come right back with more thoughts on depression and what we can do in order to overcome.